button. And I am going to do a short introduction to EDPNC for those of you that might not be familiar with us, and then we'll kick off today's topic. So welcome to the Coffee Talk. Thank you for taking your time. Our topic this morning is managing foreign exchange risk with international business transactions. I'm Melissa McGurk, one of the international trade managers at the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, or EDPNC. And EDPNC is a public-private partnership. We are charged with much of North Carolina's economic growth needs. For those of you that aren't familiar with the trade team, we are putting all of our focus into helping North Carolina companies reach and succeed in foreign markets. We offer a combination of free services to include consultations with foreign offices. We also have free educational webinars, and we have a grant program that's designed to help ease the lift of outreach to foreign markets that can help to cover the cost of activities, including trade show exhibits, website localization in foreign markets, and other relevant export-related services. In the chat, when I get there and put my contact information for you to reference, I'll also put our website where you can go to look at our events. Keep in mind, when you go to our event page, you are going to find these type of activities. What we have very specific export compliance training as well. And then the opportunities to co-exhibit in North Carolina booths are also listed on the event page. So I will put that in the chat momentarily. We have two main goals through these coffee talks. First, of course, we want to bring you information about various aspects of your export journey by inviting experienced professionals such as Pat to offer their expertise. Now, second, we want to give you the opportunity to have dialogue with these experts as well as your North Carolina peers. And that is one reason why I've asked you to put information into the chat. I have seen networking happen between North Carolina companies, and gives you the opportunity to carry on a conversation offline if needed. I'm going to quickly introduce Pat because I was just notified from my computer that I forgot to plug in and I don't want to be disconnected. So Pat, if that happens, run with it and I will be back momentarily. So today's expert, as I mentioned, is Pat Weaver. He is the Director of Foreign Exchange and National Sales Executive for Corpay. Pat studied international finance at the London School of Economics, has had more than 30 years experience in international payments.
Okay, Melissa, you've frozen, I believe. So, adding where Melissa left off, 30 years experience, international payments and foreign exchange risk management. Corpay is the largest non-bank international payments and risk management specialist in the world. We specialize in helping companies, small to medium-sized companies that don't get the same rates and service from their banks, and that's what the role of Corpay is. We go and we help those companies, and that's what my role is to help the companies better manage their international payments and help them grow their international sales. So I'm also on the executive board of the District Export Council. The District Export Council is a partner organization to the EDPNC, and the goal of the District Export Council is a group of international professionals with different expertise that are available to help companies who have those questions get the answers they need so they can better manage their growth and grow their companies internationally. So we'll wait a second to see if Melissa comes back on.
I think also at this time, if anybody wants to put in the chat any questions that they might have for Pat or share their company or their industry, any of those pieces that Melissa mentioned at the beginning of the call, I think that would be helpful for us as we wait for Melissa to hopefully jump back on.
Okay.
Pat, I think Melissa said you could go ahead and maybe get started.
Okay.
She's still having some issues.
Love technology. Okay. So what we're going to get started with is, first of all, kind of going into what exactly is foreign exchange risk and how does it impact companies who are selling internationally. So foreign exchange risk, if you look at a graph of the euro versus the US dollar, you will see lines going up and down, as the currency moves to different impact events for the currencies. And again, just looking over the last 6 to 9 months, you've seen the US dollar as high as a 112 versus the euro, and as high as a 112 and as low as a 105. And various sort of factors go into to moving the currency. So again, it can be comments about various sort of economic, whether it's employment, whether it's in inflation numbers, whether it's information about where interest rates are going to be going, also political events, again, situation in the Ukraine, how that impacts the other countries in Europe can have an impact on the currency. Oil prices, some countries are very tied to commodity pricing, so such as Canada, Australia. So impact, any impact in the industry or in the oil industry could have an impact on those currencies as well. So the risk with a currency moving up and down over a period of time is, if you're buying or selling a product in a particular currency, the value of that in US dollars fluctuates over, with the currency. So the goal and what we're going to talk about today is what are the benefits, what are the risks, and how to manage that so you actually can take advantage of the movements, protect yourself against the movements, and just understand the whole process of what foreign exchange is, and like I say, how to protect yourself against negative moves in that currency. So what what is the next obvious question is, if I price in US dollars, am I protected against this fluctuation of the currency? And the question is, or the answer is yes and no. Basically, what are the risks of, again, what are the risk of pricing in US dollars? What are the benefits? Why do companies look at doing pricing in US dollars? So why do companies default to US dollars? Several reasons. One, they're US dollar functional. I hear a lot of times that with smaller companies that their accounting system can only accommodate one currency. So by default, they're only going to price in US dollars. By pricing in US dollars, they're putting the foreign exchange risk on their clients. Again, a lot of times customers will come to me and they will say, we don't want any risk. And so we're only going to be priced in US dollars. And another huge factor is local currency restrictions. So if you are looking to export to Central or South America, then basically anywhere below Mexico, you pretty much have to invoice in US dollars. You cannot invoice them in their local currency because they cannot get the local currency out of their country to pay you in that currency. Again, the only way you would be able to do that is if you established an entity in that country to establish a banking account. So, which is a very expensive process. So if you were looking to export to Peru, you would have to invoice them in US dollars. So those are the reasons why you would do that, why you would invoice in local currencies, or what I hear is the most common reasons for pricing in US dollars. But
Hey, Pat, I'm back and I'm ready to chime in. I'm ready to
go ahead,
chime
chime in right away.
So what's the flip side of that? So you talked about, just generally speaking, some specific situations where there's advantages, but tell us about the risks going on, pursuing that side of things too.
So again, if you price in local, or if you price in US dollars, you basically feel, like I said, you've put the foreign exchange risk on your customer. But what does that actually mean to you as a US company? So, the risks are that, one, if the US dollar strengthens significantly and you're pricing in US dollars, then your price has just increased to your customer by the same amount as the US dollar. So again, if the US dollar strengthens by 3 to 5%, then your US dollar invoice to your client has just increased your price to them by that same 3 to 5%, because they need to take whatever their local currency is, buy US dollars, and then pay you. So if they get that, if it's 5%, 3% more expensive to pay it, that's a cost. And then what does that increased price mean to you? Are you still competitive? Do you still have a competitive price, or have you just priced yourself out of the market? So, that's one of the big risks. Another risk that I hear all the time is if I price in local currency, there is a delay sometimes in getting paid. What will happen is, if you're putting the risk on your customer, but is your customer actually managing that risk? So they know they have to pay you in 30, 60 days, but have they done the proper management to protect themselves against those foreign exchange fluctuations? If not, when it comes time to pay you, they may tell you, oh, can't pay you this week, but I'll pay you next week. And what actually is happening is the dollar has moved against them, and they're hoping next week it's going to be cheaper for them to pay US dollars. And again, one way to eliminate that delay in payment is say, hey, you pay me in euros, you pay me in Canadian dollars, Mexican peso, whatever their currency is. And that takes away the excuse of the currency being against them. So, you know, the other risk is, and I've had this happen, you know, numerous times, is if you price in local currency and the dollar goes up, like I say, you're at a risk of having your orders be either partially or completely that they will stop those payments. They'll cancel their orders. I had a client, they were selling yachts to Italy, and they had priced in US dollars. The dollar had increased by, 5%. And the Italian buyer did not protect themselves. So they basically canceled in the middle of the contract. And if you're familiar with the time to build a yacht, it can be anywhere from a year to 18 months to build a yacht. So in the middle of the build, those three contracts, or the contracts for the three boats, were canceled. And, my client was left with three work in process yachts without a buyer for them. So again, that's not necessarily a good thing. I had worked for banks for many years, and, banks don't really look favorably on, that much in inventory without a buyer for that. So that's one of the risks. I had another customer who was, they were a broker, and they were selling a retired Air Force One plane to the Swedish government. And same sort of situation, they priced it to the Swedish government in US dollars, and the US dollar increased, made that more expensive to the Swedish government. So they did pay, but there was actually a 3 to 4 week delay for the Swedish government to actually pay them. And it put our US client in a lot of stress, because the banks wanted to get paid and they didn't have the US dollars to, the money to actually pay the bank for the loans that they gave them to buy the plane, which they sold. So if they had invoiced in Swedish krona, had hedged themselves, protected themselves against the foreign currency fluctuation, the Swedish government would have been paid at time. They have Swedish krona. It doesn't matter what the dollar goes up and down. They pay Swedish krona to our client. Our client hedged themselves. They know exact value of what the Swedish krona contract was going to be in US dollars, and there would not have been an issue. We'll get into how to hedge in more detail, but those are the risks of pricing in local currency. I mean, again, two of the biggest factors: are you still competitive? Does an increase in the US dollar cause your price to be uncompetitive? And the risk of partial or full cancellation of contracts because the pricing is no longer competitive or advantageous to your client. So those are the risks. And the next, are there any questions there, Melissa, or do you want to go on to what the benefits are?
Well, let's talk about a little bit of the it depends part of things on
Okay.
that. So every business is different. I've been looking at some of the folks that are on the call here, and I know they're not selling yachts and they're not selling huge things, right? So can you please give us a scenario that you know of where there was a smaller company involved that kind of shipped smaller items? Make it a little, give us a kind of a mini case study snapshot of how that could apply to that type of business that has smaller shipments and smaller items. And would there be a lot more nuance with when there were advantages versus not to make that decision if it's a smaller shipment?
Okay.
Now, the cost involved in locking in a certain rate long term, if it's a smaller shipment.
Right. Okay. Let me talk about an example I had with a small company. It was actually a fairly large contract, especially for them, but it was a small company. They're 10-15 million dollar in revenue company. They had an opportunity to quote on a project in Europe, and it was a $25 million project, so it was a big project. I'll get specific to the smaller in a second, but talking about a smaller company, and they had an opportunity to quote on it. It was going to be over 5 years, but they had to quote in euros as opposed to US dollars. That was a requirement to bid on the project. So that's another risk, that I didn't mention earlier is, again, you could be left out of opportunity if you don't quote in the local currency. But so what we did is we developed a hedging strategy, a pricing strategy, so they would know exactly what the cost of the euros would be over that period of 5 years. So they could come up with a pricing system to go in the proposal. And for a 10 to 15 million dollar company, you win a $25 million contract over 5 years, you've significantly increased the size of your company and profitability over that time. So this can apply to small companies. I mean, again, 10 to 15 million is not a large company, but for smaller situations, I had a lot of companies which are, if they're selling on Amazon and going through Amazon Canada, for instance, Amazon Canada will be very benevolent and they will say, oh, don't worry about the exchange rate. We'll pay you in US dollars. Well, Amazon Canada is taking 3 to 5% in that conversion. So you're actually losing money by having them do the exchange rate. So, and that's the other sort of situation you have to understand is, I've heard from a lot of US companies, oh, well, my client is more familiar with foreign exchange, so they can get better exchange rates than I can. That's not always the case. It's basically who they are dealing with and who you are dealing with as far as who gets a better exchange rate and how that's going to impact when you're negotiating your contract. So, having that in your, another arrow in your quiver when you're going to negotiation, say, look, my product's $10,000, $5,000, whatever it is. But if it's more convenient for you to pay in a local currency, Canadian dollars, euros, whatever, then this is your price in euros. You can pay me that. And what you would do is you would, take your price in US dollars, convert it to that currency, and that's what we do. We help you determine what sort of price you should be using, add an additional profit margin, and it can actually be more beneficial for you to quote in local currency than it is in US dollars. So one of the things what I when I have these sort of talks, what I talk about is, and again, a lot of exporters are also importers as well. And it's easier to look at it from an importer standpoint, what the benefits. So if somebody's importing product from Germany, 95 to 99% of the time, it's cheaper to buy in euros than it is to pay in US dollars. And why is that? It's because the company in Germany is building in an exchange rate margin into their price. And if it's a small margin, a 0.5%, 0.25%, that's not a bad thing. But if it is a large margin, then that is making that price significantly more expensive for you. I had a client that was buying rail cars from Canada, and he was paying in US dollars for many years. And, I tried to convince him, just ask for a quote in both US dollars and in Canadian dollars. And on a $10 million order, I saved him $500,000 by paying in Canadian dollars as opposed to US dollars. Now, is 5% the average that you could save? Not necessarily, but it's not out of the norm either. So why would the Canadian company be charging 5%? Well, one, they're charging the 5% because there is a risk that they want to protect themselves against, but it's not 5%. So the difference between that is they're using that as a secondary source of income. And that's, again, another reason why, if you ask for a price in both US dollars and the local currency, they may be hesitant to give you that price in the local currency because they are using the exchange rate as a secondary source of income. So the reason why I bring that up is now you turn that over to an exporter. And they should be, a US exporter should be using that same sort of logic when they're pricing their product. You can increase your profit margins by invoicing in the local currency. Again, as I mentioned before, you know what the price you want in US dollars, but as a convenience, you pay me this in Canadian dollars. You mark that up by 1, 2, 3%. And you've just increased your profit margins by 1 to 3%. You can increase your sales. If it's more convenient for them to pay in their local currency, then maybe they'll actually have a larger order. They'll be able to afford a larger order than if it was only US dollar based. Again, I had a customer up in Canada. He was selling his product in Canada, and his sales were running off. They were, they started out good, but after a while they started going down. And I asked him, well, who is your competitors? And he said, local Canadian companies. Well, unless your product is significantly better or different than your competitor in country, then it may be more convenient for them to just buy from the local person in Canadian dollars than it is to buy your product in US dollars. So that's another reason that you should be looking to price in local currency. And the other thing is, if you know what that risk is, then, as I mentioned before, you can manage that as opposed to hope that your client is managing it. So, Melissa, did I answer your question?
Yes, so that was great. And at some point, we can have you maybe between now and the end of the call walk through, hey, someone reaching out to you and saying, hey, Pat, how do I start? What do I do? How can the people on this call kind of imagine first steps with you helping them. And before we get there, though, let's make sure that we've covered all the basics. So the concept of hedging, you only mentioned that word once or twice so far. I know you're avoiding, these maybe some of the words that are harder to grasp when you're explaining the practical terms, which is great. But connect the dots for us. Let's make sure that we're covering the concepts, and then let's kind of roll into let's use maybe Michelle as an example with QMax, who's on the call, and they are selling large things. So we can even just kind of role play what's step A, B, C, D to give people an action plan that they could think about before leaving the call.
Okay. So again, as a first step, you're in a negotiation with a customer in, say Canada, Europe, UK, wherever you want to say, you're in negotiation. You know what that price is in US dollars. But again, there are additional costs to sell internationally. You need to build that into your US dollar price. But now you're in negotiation and your client says, okay, that's fine, but can you sell it to me in, my currency, euros? So first thing you need to do is you need to understand what the exchange rate you need to be using in order to convert your US dollar price to a euro price. You cannot just go online and say, okay, well, I see what the price is. I'm just going to do the conversion and give that price to my customer. The problem with that is that price is not the price that you are going to receive. You have to understand what sort of price you're going to get from your bank or your currency provider. And then you need to use that price in order to start the conversion process. The next step is, when are you going to get paid? Is it going to be an immediate transaction, 1 week, 2 week, whatever? Or is it going to be an order that's going to be paid in 60, 90 days? There is a different price that you are going to get for a spot purchase or spot sale, which is an immediate sale, or a forward sale, something in the future. And the forward price is the one you actually need to use as the conversion, because that's the price you're actually going to be getting in 30, 60, 90 days, not the spot price, not the price that you see on the computer, on the internet when you pull it up. And those are two mistakes that somebody who's just starting out is going to make. Oh, I priced it at, I saw it on the computer. I priced it at that. The currency moved 2 or 3% from that. And you just lost, some or part of your profit margin. And again, that's what you're trying to protect. I mean, having international sales are great, but you have to understand what the risks are, and you have to manage that risk in order to protect yourself. So there are several alternatives to managing that risk. Okay. The first thing is simply to do nothing. Some companies will tell me, well, we don't want to do forwards because, that's like gambling. We don't know where the currency is going to go. We don't want to lock it in now. What if it goes in our favor and we could have made more money? All those sort of things, are comments that I will hear. And what I will tell them is, if you lock in your currency, you know exactly what the value of your product is when you get paid, what the value of that foreign currency is in US dollars when you get paid. When you make a sale, you will put that down as a accounts receivable or whatever, and you have to have an exchange rate on your books at that time. If you hedge it, you have a match off between a sale and a buy, and you will have a zero variance to budget, and your profit margins are protected. Now, if the currency goes in your favor and you have hedged it, then that is an opportunity loss. All your profit margins and your variances are protected, but if you did nothing, you would have made more money. Now, on the other hand, if it goes against you and you do nothing, then that becomes a real loss. Okay. So your profit margins are not protected. And you can see that, like I say, either eat into your profit margins or completely eat up your profit margins. I had a customer who was, who did this. So again, they had a project over time. It was denominated in euros. When the deal started, the price of the euros was about a 125, which is what they put it on in their books. When they started getting paid, the euro was down below 115. So they were taking a 10% hit. They did not hedge. So they were taking a 10% hit every time they got paid just to do the conversion. So, doing nothing to me is not a good strategy. So the next step is, well, what is an appropriate strategy? And that would be forward contracts. 85 to 90% of the companies in the United States use forward contracts as the mechanism for managing their foreign exchange risk. And a forward contract is simply locking in the exchange rate today for a known transaction in the future. So again, if you have a sale that's 60 days out, you go to your currency provider and you say, Pat, I know I'm going to receive 10,000, 20,000 euros in 60 days. I want to lock in a forward contract for that. So I give you the exact price in 60 days. Now certain that when you receive those euros, what that US dollar value is going to be. And that, like I say, 85 to 90% of companies in the United States use forward contracts as the mechanism to managing the risk. Now, there are other strategies. There's option strategies, which again are not necessarily appropriate for smaller type companies.
Okay.
Again, some of them, can be, but for an option contract, most companies are going to require at least $250,000 to quote an option. I had a company that was looking at doing some option strategies, and they even had like $2 million, and their bank wouldn't quote it because the currency amount was too small for them.
Oh,
So
wow. So can you tell us just a little bit more about this option strategy? Because we do have some folks on the line that sell larger things. And
Yeah.
I also have some small companies in my portfolio, but each transaction tends to be a high dollar figure transaction.
So options are great. And if you look at options as an insurance policy, that's exactly what they are. You will pay an upfront premium, just like you do with your insurance premium. But just like an insurance policy on your house, you never want to use it, because what happens if you use your house insurance? Something bad happened to your house. It got, a tree fell on it. It got struck by lightning, whatever. So it's the same thing with an option. An option is the right, but not the obligation to buy or sell currency at a particular price in the future. So if you do a vanilla option, with certainty that you will get no worse than whatever your strike price is. And the strike price is the contract price. Okay. So for an example, if you enter into an option to sell euros at a 105 for 3 months, you are protected at 105 if the currency goes against you. If the currency goes down to 103 to, below 1-to-1, you can sell your euros at 105 and be protected. But the nice thing about an option is if it goes to 107, if it goes to 110, you let your option expire and you can sell your euros at spot at the 107, 110, whatever the prevailing rate is, and you make an additional amount of money. Now, there are some calculations that you have to do when you're looking at that. Typically, an option is going to cost 3%, 2 to 3% of the notional amount of your contract. So now you have to say that the currency is going to move plus or minus 2 or 3% to make that strategy a better strategy than the forward contract. And
Gotcha.
that's what I help with. When I talk to a customer about hedging, we will go through different sort of mechanisms of hedging, different sort of options, alternatives, products for hedging. And every year when we go through that hedging process, because of what the market conditions are, they may choose a different mechanism. If they think, if the prevailing wisdom, the market expectations is for the currency, for the US dollar to strengthen, then a forward contract is a more appropriate hedge alternative than an option. Why pay additional when most of the market is looking for it to go against you? Just lock it in, you know what it is. Now, if it's going the other direction, if the market is thinking, okay, we're at 105 now, but the market expectation is over 3-6 months, it's going to go to 110, 115, then an option strategy may be more appropriate than a forward contract. And there are combinations of forward and options that with a forward, there is 0 fees. There's no cost to enter into a forward contract. There are fees to enter into an option contract. A forward contract, there is no variability, flexibility. You know exactly what the price is, regardless of what the currency is. The option gives you absolute flexibility in taking advantage of positive currency moves. There are combinations, 0 cost option alternatives, which will give you more flexibility, but greater certainty on your protection. So you don't get as much upside, but your downside is limited and you're not paying anything for it. And
so I guess part of it depends on risk appetite, right? And
and that's, that kind of gets into, I know I'm jumping ahead here, but that gets into best practices, right? And one of the big things, people say, well, I don't hedge because, upper management, they'll say, oh, well, why did you hedge? If you didn't hedge, we would have made more money. So again, you get these Monday morning quarterback upper management, and the controller, the treasurer, who's ever managing the foreign exchange risk, will be hesitant to do it if upper management is going to look back. And so you need to have a risk management policy in place to basically outline what the steps are that you should be taking. So, I have a contract, and anytime I have a contract in a local currency, I am going to hedge that contract. I am going to hedge that contract by using, forward contracts to hedge it. I'm going to hedge, 50%. 85% of the notional value of that. Everything should be spelled out specifically. So when the person goes to, explain the financial results, why did you do this? I followed the approved foreign exchange policy for our company to do that. That's what I was dictated to do. That's what I did. So that's why, I will always suggest, even for small companies that are doing forward contracts or any sort of international transactions in local currency, to have some sort of foreign exchange policy in place regard. And again, having upper management buy-in, understanding that's exactly what what's going to happen, why it's happening, makes it easier for everybody.
Very nice. Thank you. So just to touch base on time and what we want to still accomplish. First, I'm going to encourage those on the call to think about any questions they have for Pat and start typing those into the chat, should you have them. And then Pat, since we have about 10 minutes left, I want to make sure that you're finishing to cover key points that we haven't had the opportunity to cover yet. So can you take a few minutes to ensure that you've covered your key concepts and advice while we're waiting to see if any other questions come in?
Yeah, so I think I've covered the only thing that I typically follow up with is, just best practices, right? And, we can see if there's any questions and address them first, or I can start going through, what I think is some of the best practices when you have an opportunity to sell in a local currency.
Yeah, I say go ahead with the best practices, and then we'll see if questions pop into the chat, and I'll give you heads up.
Okay. The first best practice is again, you've got to understand what the risk is. And that comes, how much am I actually selling? How far out in the future am I going to be receiving it? You have to understand what the future cash flow is. It's cash flow projections, only it's cash flow projections in a foreign currency. So understanding that is the first step to properly managing the risk. You have to understand what the exposure is before you can put in a risk management policy against it. You have to understand what the effects are on the currency moves, on your pricing. As I mentioned earlier, is a quote in US dollars going to, if the dollar strengthens, going to price you out of that market? The impact of inflation, if you will, on your prices to that local currency. Understanding that is vital to, having an effective international sales program. Again, quantifying that risk, understanding what currencies you're dealing in and how they fluctuate over time, and understanding the time horizon again, because again, currencies will fluctuate less over a 3-month period than, or the potential for them to fluctuate is less over a 1-month period than it is over 60 days. So understanding what that risk is. Most companies will look at a time horizon of a year. A lot of companies go through their budgeting process. And if they know, hey, I'm going to sell, $100,000 worth of my product to Europe next year in euros, and I'm going to get X amount every month, then if they know it's going to be in euros, then they have to come up with a budgeted rate to go on their books to determine what that is in US dollars. So then we have the conversation of protecting their budget rates over that period of time. So having an appropriate budget rate, and I can help companies come up with that budget rate, what they should be using, is important and a great best practice. Again, companies will look at a 1 year time horizon, whether it's fiscal or whether it's a yearly, end of year sort of process, but maybe they don't hedge 100% for that period of time. Maybe the 3 to 6 months is a more known value, so they'll hedge 85 to 100% of that, of the notional amount of those. But maybe the end of the year isn't quite as known, so maybe they'll only do 25 to 50%. And then as time goes by and as those contracts become more firm, then you add layers of hedging to lock in the price in there. And that is, again, a lot of companies do that. So I add that as a good practice, understanding how firm those prices are.
Yeah,
Okay.
over the horizon, time horizon.
Over the horizon, exactly.
We did have a question. I'm going to read you verbatim. Okay. So,
Okay.
and then I'll probably ask Kimo to chime in. So it says here, I sell a CPG. Is a hedge or forward better for a company? So I'm going to ask, can you unmute and give a little bit more background on that for Pat so he can answer the question?
Can you hear me, Pat?
I can.
Okay. I sell a Hawaiian hot sauce. I do have countries that are interested in our product. For, a consumable product, would a hedge fund or would a forward kind of contract be a better option for my company?
Well, it depends. Where are you selling to? What
Well,
countries?
Right now, it's probably going to be like Dubai, Japan, some parts of Central America.
Okay.
Because we're just starting to get into the international market. That's why.
Right. Okay. So for Central America, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are currency restrictions on the Central American countries that you cannot price in local currency. So those countries you would have to price in US dollars. So there's no need to do a forward contract or any sort of hedging there. With Dubai, the UAE is a fixed currency to the US dollar. So again, not necessarily a need to quote in dirham as opposed to US dollars. Again, it may be more convenient. They have they'll have dollars. It may be more convenient for them, but again, there's no need to hedge that because it's a fixed currency. For Japan, there's an opportunity there, yes, because the currency does fluctuate. Again, the kind of the steps which I talked about before, you can increase your profit margin, potentially increase sales if you quote in the Japanese yen. But then when you get the contract, that's when you should look at doing a forward contract. And again, there are different sort of hedging strategies with forward contracts that we can help smaller companies. Because again, if you have an order of $2,000, then maybe that's going to be too small to hedge. But if you have an order over 6 months, which is going to be $15,000 or so, then we can do a strategy that would lock in the exchange rate for all of your order over that period of time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Pat. We have another question that came in, Pat, which is very appropriate for towards the end of the session. The question is, what is your process for helping potential new clients engage with you? So essentially, I think the question is, what are the first steps? Michelle, let me know if I interpreted that wrong, but Pat, go ahead and comment on best first step.
The first step is just having a conversation so I can understand exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Again, where are you trying to sell to? What are your potential amounts of the contracts that you're going to be selling? And then we can start talking about strategies, what sort of pricing to use. Okay, we've come up with the appropriate price for your contracts or for your product. Now we need to know what that volume is going to be over a certain period of time. Then we need to talk about how we're going to hedge that so you're protected against adverse currency moves. But it all comes, the more I can understand your situation, what you're trying to accomplish, I can design and help you develop a hedging strategy that will best suit your situation.
So Pat, for that initial consultation or any of the consultations, what should they expect? Probably also from a financial obligation. Earlier, you mentioned that there is no cost for the foreign contracts because your gains would be built in. But can you kind of clarify their financial obligation in working with you to try to protect themselves?
There is no financial obligation whatsoever. Even if you set up an account with Corpay to send international payments, receive international payments, there's no obligation to actually use it. There's no cost to set it up. A simple process to create an account with us. Again, no cost, no obligation. And as I mentioned before, since I'm also on the executive board of the District Export Council, that is one of my roles to help companies with this sort of situation. I am the international foreign exchange risk management expert on the deck, and I'm the person, so if you went to another person on the deck, they would say, well, talk to Pat. And that's what I do. I help companies. I try to get them situated so they understand what the risks are, how to manage them. And there's no cost to do that, to have that conversation.
Thanks. Hey, Pat, can you please put your email address in the chat if you're comfortable with that? I put my email address in the chat. So those that are on the call interested in connecting with him, you can always reach out to me as well if you need to jump off the call right now. And I can introduce you to Pat via email. So you could either jot down my email address at the top of the chat, or Pat's going to be putting in his.
So can you see that, Melissa?
Yep, patrick.weaver@corpay.com. So yeah, he just put it in there for you. I want to thank you for your expertise and time today, Pat. Thank you everyone for joining. I am going to ask something of those folks that are on the call. So in kind of gearing up for 2024 and these coffee talks, you're going to see if you're in our database a survey that may have already come through or will come through soon to get your feedback on the coffee talks, including topics you're interested that we broach for you. There's a place where I think you could write in ideas if they weren't one of the choices. Email me at my email address as well to give me feedback on various things. Obviously, plugging in my computer. I already know that one. Thanks for that, your patience earlier. But we are here to try to help you on your journey. And so we need your feedback on how we can help you do that. Pat, as he said, is a part of our greater ecosystem serving on the District Export Council, which, for clarification purposes, there's state-run district export councils and there's a national district export council. Those people serving are volunteering themselves also as mentors. There are North Carolina companies that have representatives on the board, and they also are available to just go to coffee with you and talk about exporting. If you want to connect with a fellow exporter, either Pat or myself can introduce you to someone on the District Export Council so you can have a one-on-one conversation with people that have already been where you're going, and they can give you comments on all of these things as well. So, Pat, do you have any closing words?
No, I mean, again, just as you said, we're here to help. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Melissa, and she can relay it to me. However you want to handle it, send me an email. I will follow up immediate with you to, set up a conversation so we can discuss it. And, that's what we're here for.
Sounds good. And Kathleen just had a good question. She asked if the transcript will be available from today's presentation. So Kathleen, yes, what usually happens is our marketing team will put the link to the recording, which ends up on YouTube, in the follow-up email, which kind of tells you about the upcoming coffee talk, and it'll say thank you for joining us last month, and it will be in there. You can email me if you want it earlier. I'll send it to you because I understand there may be some people within your companies that need to see this presentation, so you have a better opportunity to get everyone on the same page, unless you invite them to the meeting with Pat. But you can email me directly, or you could look for it in your email inbox. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.